29th of April 2025. Thank you for taking your seats and for your attendance and attention. Before we start the meeting, I just want to acknowledge that yesterday, the 28th of November, was Workers' Memorial Day. And that's a time for organisations to memorialise the workers who have been killed or injured at work. And I understand that every week 18 New Zealand workers are killed as a consequence of their work, and as many as every 15 minutes a worker suffers an injury that requires at least a week off work. Sobering information, colleagues. And a big thank you to the Council of Trade Unions for their advocacy in keeping workers safe and healthy at work. Kia ora. So having said that, members, join me in our opening karakia. E noi tātou. Tuia e runga, tuia e raro, tuia e roto, tuia e waho. Tuia na kaya mahi o na kaunihira o Kirikiriroa. Whaia ta iti kahurangi. Kia u, kia mau, kia ita. Haumie, huie, tai kie. Thank you, and apologies for not getting that up in time. But good work on remembering that, everyone. The timings for our meeting this morning, we have Andrew Mickle from the LGFA joining us today, and he'll be coming in person. We're hoping to put his presentation at around 11 o'clock. And that means he'll be able to join us for morning tea. I've got a special thank you and a shout out to Councillor Louise for her baking. And yeah, so that's a really nice way to be able to host our guest. And that means, I beg your pardon? It survived the bike. And got cycled in. So saving us on carbon miles as well. Members, also we have a bit of a hard stop this afternoon, hopefully at around 12:30 or maybe a little before if we can manage that. Councillor Ewan, Mayor Paula and I have an establishment board hearings, hui for the Waters Establishment Board. So important work that we need to get away to, and no doubt you'll have other commitments for your afternoons as well. So let's be deliberate in our meeting this morning and a little disciplined as well, sticking to our questions and being able to shout out to staff to be succinct with your answers if you can, please. And I'll be asking Kieran to assist me with some timekeeping so that we can keep up with that. So let us look at the agenda this morning and acknowledge apologies for lateness from Councillor Moko. Thank you, and Mayor Paula also, thank you. Are there any other apologies? Councillor Emma.
Sorry, I did email, but...
oh, you did too.
From 10 to 11:30 I'm away on council business for civil defence, so I have to excuse myself for a Zoom meeting.
Thank you. And Councillor Tim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought I'd emailed, but if not, I apologise. Could I foreshadow a provisional apology for early departure? I'll need to be away soon after 11:30, but from what you've just said, we may, I hope, will be well down the agenda by then.
Thank you. Yes, thanks, Tim. Noted. Anything further, colleagues? I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Wilson. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you. Confirmation of the agenda as it is written here, noting that we were hoping to take item 9 at 11 a.m. I'll move, and Councillor Louise seconds. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you. Any declarations of interest, colleagues? There being none. Public forum. We have no one for public forum and no one even in the gallery. So hopefully there's lots and lots of interest online for our meeting today. And Councillor Huata has already taken my photograph and we'll be posting the link. So look out for your cameo shots in that later in the day. Kia ora. So we're now to item 5, confirmation of the minutes for the 28th of February 2025. Oh, sorry, 27th of February 2025. Are there any matters of clarification or correction? There are none. I'll move and Councillor Anna will second. All those in favour? Thank you. Item number 6, the Chair's report. I'll take that as read and I'm happy to move it. Councillor Sarah seconds. I'm going around the room, by the way, for seconds, so that's moved and seconded. We'll go to move that then. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Thank you, colleagues.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Wow, you're doing really well, team. Item number 7, we're already halfway down the page, the Capital Portfolio Monitoring Report. And that means that's you, Ian, and Kelly up to the stage, if you would. And just let me find my notes. As you do that, I'd just like to take a moment to thank you and the team for the information session that was held on the 9th of April. That was a session that was a direct response from our committee meeting in February for members to have a bit more information over the Capital Works program, timing, etc. So thank you for doing that. I also draw your attention to an item in tomorrow's council agenda. So let's not conflate all of those things into this report for Ian and Kelly, if you would, please. And we'll rely on Ian and Kelly to be able to filter those questions for us. So the meeting is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Maxine. Good morning, elected members. It's Kelly and I here to present the Capital Monitoring Report for the 8-month period ended 28th of February, along with an update on the revised budget position for the current year. Not only the current year, but also looking at years 2 and 3, so that sort of leverages off exactly what Councillor Chair Maxine just mentioned in terms of the workshop that was held back on the 9th of April, where staff reported on the 3-year position. But I'll start with the actual capital spend for the 8th month is 127.8 million, and that had associated revenue of 35.6. You'll notice from the comparative data that we provide there that that 127 is quite a long way behind the same period 12 months ago, and that sort of starts to bet in that story that, look, the deferrals this year are high. We know they're high. They've been reported high for the last number of iterations of this meeting, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in my presentation, but I won't go into too much detail given the meeting time. So look, since we last presented the report and came out of that February meeting, the elected members did ask us to go away and have a look at the 3-year program from a delivery point of view, and that culminated in that presentation or the workshop on the 9th of April. So the good thing, this report here is consistent with that, and it is really an extension of the data we presented to you that day. Again, it's been good to start to take our eyes off the 1-year silo approach to the presentation and actually have a look at the 3-year program, and understanding what happens this year actually has an impact on years 2 and on year 3 in terms of delivery, and therefore impact on financial strategy. So I know we've talked about it ad nauseum, but we do understand that one of the reasons that we have the high level of deferrals coming in this year that we're currently reporting is, look, we did start this LTP cycle with a high degree of uncertainty, largely off the back end of what we, at the time, we were unsure as to what the NZTA implications would be, and the loss of that subsidy could have had a significant impact on financial strategy, and as a result, I think the organisation took the right prudent approach to actually have a look at the program, slow things down, and ensure that we weren't overextending ourselves or getting ourselves into a situation until such times as the subsidy issue clarified or crystallised. It has done so now, and as a result, we now have far greater certainty as what we're doing. But the reality is, what that delay did was it slowed the whole machined down, and we're now starting to pick that up again, and that really is probably the primary driver why we're seeing that significant level of deferrals for this financial year going into next. Yes, Council did approve during the LTP that we would manage the program as a 3-year program, but I don't really think even at that time it was envisaged that the quantum of the level of deferrals in year 1. But regardless, we do have that overarching directive that we can look at the delivery over the 3 years. Look, the outcome, the purpose of the workshop was to give greater certainty over the year 1 deferrals, and I'm pleased to report that since the last report where we reported a range of up to 170, we're still very confident that's what it will be. It's not going to go beyond that, and the data in the report confirms that. And we've also equally now got solid data that we can use as the basis for our 25-26 annual plan capital program, which we'll put forward. So just to summarise, there's a summary table on paragraph 63 within the report, and you'll see that it states that year 1 we're expecting to deliver a program 207 mil. Next year a program of 249, and then in year 3 549. Now that's clearly a very high number, but those years and those numbers do align with the presentation and the workshop you saw on the 9th of April. So that 207 that I just mentioned for year 1, that is in line. That is in line with the deferral level of 170 million. The year 2 of 249, again, that will form the basis for the 25-26 annual plan, which will come back through the chamber. In terms of the budget, the only thing I want to say is on attachment 2, you'll know that we give you a summary of all the budget movements throughout the year, tracks all the changes approved by each of the various council committee meetings. I've added another column into there, which just gives you a forecast column. It sits to the left of the total column, and it's just to give you some indication about what the quantum of the remaining changes will be, so we get to that year-end position of 207. So again, that's just to maybe just try and give you better information around it. I'll just move on and just WIP, work in progress. Look, that continues to be an area of high staff focus. It continues to be a challenging area for staff, given the sheer quantum of it and the complexity around it, but staff continue to give that a very high focus in terms of that. And I know working with finance team with Gary, we're really starting to put a real laser focus onto WIP and understanding what's driving it and what are the barriers to getting it through and getting it capitalised quicker because of the implications it has on the financial position. In terms of the activity sheets, there's 2 projects remain as orange there, the 2 same projects that you reported back in the February meeting, the last meeting. So that's just a Collins Road wastewater project which suffered from unusual unexpected groundwater conditions, and the other one is the Embassy Theatre open space. Finally, what I'll just say is we still state 2 portfolio risks. This is risks that affect our entire portfolio. The first one is, just to reiterate, we've been reporting it for the last two meeting cycles. WIP reclassification. This is when capital expenditure no longer meets the capital definition, and therefore must be immediately expensed through onto your operating statement. Therefore, it has an impact on your operating result and your balance in the book. So we still continue to look at that, and we do have that School Link project which is sitting in there, and until such time we have final decision on what we're doing with that project, should the council choose not to, or that project is no longer viable to move forward in its current form, we actually have incurred to date circa about $5 million costs in establishment, design, scoping type work. Now that work really would have to be expensed at that point, given that it would be unreasonable to expect a tangible asset to come out the other end of that. And then finally, look, it talks a little bit to the NZT issue. We do have obviously the possible establishment of a water CCO, and obviously with that, what that does is that just creates a degree of uncertainty as to where we're going and what we're doing, and that uncertainty, as we probably all know and all acknowledge, it can just create, it's not the most optimum environment for delivery, so it does slow things down. So we'll just keep monitoring that and keep reporting back to you in terms of that. Look, I think, Kelly?
Brilliant as always, Ian.
Well, thanks for that. I traded to say that. No, joking aside. No, it's not an area for levity, but no, seriously. I mean, I'm happy to take it. The rest of the report is read, and I'm happy to take any questions. We've got Kelly here, obviously Executive Director Chris Allen sitting over in the to the right of me. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Kelly, we have some questions on the board. So let's go firstly to Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Maxine. Thank you for your verbal summary. Just going back to page 17, if I could start with the capital expenditure revised program. In light of the fact that we potentially are struggling to do what we are stating we're going to do in 24-25 and 25-26, can you give me the confidence? Can you give me the confidence that we'll actually be able to do $549 million in 2026-27 in terms of capital projects?
So as indicated at the workshop on the 9th, the way that the team is approaching it is a 3-year program of work. And we've also presented the future council versus water differentiation in terms of capital delivery. So if we look at future council, I'm really confident about that, about the delivery of that program. In terms of water, that's a bit more challenging because of the potential formation of CCO and what we may or may not do and the types of decisions that should be made at this point versus leaving that for a future board. I'm less confident about that, but in terms of future council, I'm really confident about that.
So, if I may, Madam Chair, although you've referred to this being a 3-year program, respectfully, I'm talking about the 3rd year where we are saying, with this document, we're going to do 549. So, could you, for example, in regards to waters and the areas you feel less confident, what's the quantum out of the 549 that is exposed?
What page is that on again?
I haven't put. Sorry, Councillor Wilson. I said in the body of the report that while the workshop presented the Year 3 program as a split between Future Council and the 3 Water program, I chose not to do it in this iteration of the report, and I'm sorry I don't have that data in front of me in terms of the split between what that is in Year 3.
If I might be able to help, there was, through the workshop, there was a slide that represented that.
Yes.
Governance, is it possible to have a look back in the diligent pack to pull out that particular slide and email that to members so that they can have a clear view of what that is?
Thank you, Maxine. I guess the reason for my question is I've asked you to try to give me confidence that you're going to be able to deliver 549 million, and I'm not hearing from you, and please feel free to walk me through your clear plan on how you intend to do that. And I would have thought, and what I'm wanting, is actually a breakdown of the projects and how you intend to do them in that year 26, 27. And it would have been just, I assumed, you would be able to say, oh, and of course, you know, the waters we're feeling less comfortable about, and it's the quantum of X, but just help me. I mean, I'm wanting to support you, but I'm just not hearing that clarity.
So, as I said, that the future council, or maybe, you know, residual council type thing without waters, I'm quite confident about the delivery of that over the 3-year program. But for the waters one, there are some decisions that the new CCO will need to make that or may not be appropriate for us to make, and may put them in a position that for that future board, they may not want to go in that position. So we're in a in-between moment of not being able to necessarily give direction or guide a new CCO because they may choose a different direction for delivery of particular projects. But in that pack on the 9th of April, we had a breakdown of waters and I think we called it residual council then, but I think future council is probably a better description of what the future council will look like. And in terms of those projects, I'm really confident about the delivery of those.
All right.
Can I just make a comment as well? So there's, the CCO will have to do, if it's approved and, after consultation and it all goes ahead with Waikato District, it has to do a waters strategy, which is pretty much a 10-year plan. And to what you're alluding to, Councillor Ewan, around capital, but also obviously its operating costs and revenue as well. And that will be an opportunity for, and we'll be, us and Waikato District staff will be working on that over the next wee while, and then that will be reviewed by the incoming CCO staff and CEO, and there will be an opportunity to review that, and I suspect that, like in any our 3-year, 10-year plan cycles, as Kelly's alluding to, that the CCO will then, obviously, in line with the statement of expectations from both councils, will be having a look at its capital program. So I know what you're alluding to is that, we're talking about 250 million a year. Previously we've sort of done, what is it, Chris, 350, 370 million in a really good year. You're obviously concerned that, we're talking about double the amount of what we're delivering at the moment. We have, as Ian and Kelly have said, we've had a bit of a slow start this year, but picking up impetus now. The key thing is that there's also some big projects in there that will get contracted as well, so in the waters side of things. So, and some of that will come through in bigger blobs of expenditure. But there is a chance to review that. I think what Kelly's saying is that we're really confident around what we're doing in, the Hamilton City residual capital program. The waters program, probably less confident.
My last question is on portfolio risk on page 19, Madam Chair. Obviously, the school link, we've already spent 5.8 million. Help me understand, if we chose to curtail the scope of school link, it wouldn't mean that everything we've spent would be lost.
Correct.
Yep.
And should we be astonished at the cost so far? I mean, the business case has cost us 2.2 million, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
That's right.
Okay. And 3.6 million for design and pre-implementation work.
That's right.
Correct.
Okay. So you've highlighted this as a concern, obviously, and that's if we decide not to go ahead, that we have to then operationalise those losses where we could capitalise them if it goes ahead. And so you're saying that if we decided to can it all together, we would add simply the 5.8 million would go directly to the balancing of the books equation.
Under that, yes, that's what would happen, yeah, assuming that there was absolutely no capital improvement on that school link route, none whatsoever, then that cost would effectively, in my opinion, need to be expensed to the
So thank you. So my last
operating.
question is, how do you scale the contribution from CapEx to OpEx? So if we decide to reduce the scale of school link by 10%, do you arbitrarily go, all right, well, so explain to me how you attribute what quantum you will exactly move from CapEx to OpEx?
So,
Well, the capitalisation policy is pretty clear about what you can and can't expense for different portions. So if we go ahead with one intersection, we can capitalise the entire design for that intersection. So the capitalisation policy guides us in what we can and can't do. It's not just a straight 10%. That's not the accounting standards.
Yeah.
Councillor Wilson, a couple of points of clarification. Agree entirely. The accounting standards need to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. They give guidance, but you actually do need to look at individual aspects to get the real clarity you're probably asking for. So we would only do that when we had clarity on what decisions had been made. Relative to balancing the books, the current council's balancing the books measure does not include capital written off against undelivered contracts from previous years. So that amount would not be assessed as we measure balancing the books.
Okay, so now I'm even more confused. So could someone, because that's just totally contrary to your preamble, so could someone explain?
So we would have to account for it as an expense within our annual report accounts. Right. The criteria that has been established for balancing the books excludes the write-off of capital work in progress from prior years.
Okay. So help me, page 19, 88. If expense, these costs would impact on both the balancing of the books matrix and the overall operating result of the 24-25. I have no difficulty understanding the latter, but is that not totally contrary, respectfully, to what you've just said?
Yep, I accept that I haven't made that as clear as it could be. There would be some of those costs current year, which would go to balancing the books, but the historic ones would not. Apologies for not making that clearer.
Okay. Sorry, Madam Chair. On this, so we are agreeing. Can you help me understand? When you say historic ones, one assumes that means it's already occurred?
Cost prior to the 1st of July 2024.
Right. So the 5.8 million, is that historic? Is that the quantum?
Yes, I don't have the exact data in front of me, Councillor Wilson, but that's the cost to date for the life of the School Link project, and it obviously started well before this financial year.
Survey.
And Gary, CFO, is saying that what he's saying is the cost prior to this financial year, those would still be an operating expense.
Right.
But wouldn't impact on your balance in the book metric. Any costs incurred in this financial year, they would impact on it. Yes, as they were.
So respectfully, so why isn't that in 87? Why haven't you broken that explanation down?
Then I'll take that on the chin and say I will. That's my fault for not giving you clear clarity in that section, and I will improve that going forward.
So final question on this, and just as a governor, you can't tell me currently if in fact 87 is an accurate quantum, as in sort of 0.87, the 5.8, if that's an accurate quantum in terms of your subsequent point of 88 where it says will have an impact on the balancing of the books. Because you can't tell me how much of that was post-July 2024.
Again, I'll step in, Councillor Wilson. I accept responsibility not for including that information. We would just need to go and do some analysis on the split of the ageing of that balance, and we can circulate that after the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gary. That's a very pragmatic approach. And that's the end of your questions, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Kelly and Ian. Firstly, thank you in terms, well, to all staff actually, in terms of the workshop on the capital program. In regard to the waters projects and that uncertainty there, if I guess if we were to put aside the uncertainty around the CCO being able to make changes in different decisions if it's established, do you see what's there as being otherwise achievable, in terms of delivery? So if we take away the possibility that they might rejig things.
So if we assume that a CCO exists,
Yeah.
and which I cannot use my magical crystal ball and guess what they may or may not decision-making criteria might be. So it would be a challenging program, that's for sure. But under the new establishment, they'll have different mechanisms that they are able to use and different ways that they're able to form contracts, or they may create different models of delivery, which may be partnerships or all sorts of things that are not available to us at this moment. So that may be an option for them. It will be challenging.
Okay. And then, I guess in terms of that being challenging, regardless of then what kind of approach they want to take, if it's established, then are we still providing some clarity around, as a council, what projects we would say would be absolute non-negotiables, and what are those projects in terms of these things must be delivered without exception?
So yes, we are, and like Lance just explained, that there's an activity report that needs to be produced, and really clear guidance has to be created for that. So yes is the short answer.
Okay. And what? So would those be the projects, for example, like the wastewater storage, holding tanks?
So we're not stopping those.
Yeah.
We're still going
Yeah.
with the program of those because they're actually incredibly important for the town. We can't stop doing those. But in terms of how many they may do at one time, that would be a decision for the CCO.
Yeah.
We're taking a staged approach, but under the CCO arrangements, they have access to greater financial limits and things like that.
Sorry
that
to
make it
interrupt you,
faster.
Kelly. Councillor Wilson, and just wonder if you could just stay in the meeting. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's okay. And another decision might be around the control room building.
Yeah.
Where exactly that's placed, how big it is. There's a lot of earthquake strengthening that needs to go on there. That's a decision the CCO would need to make themselves, but that project will have to go ahead.
Yeah.
Just in what form it is, that's for their decision making. We will do the design for that, and we will do the specifications for that, so that they can make a good decision.
Okay. In the workshop, the control room building was one thing mentioned as something that could be pushed out a little. So is that sitting in the third year or further out? Further out.
I think it's in the third year at the moment.
It's substantially in the third year,
Yeah.
with an indication that it was going to start to move out into year 4 to support what Kelly just said about
Right.
giving the CCO that ability to make some key decisions
Okay.
around that asset.
Yeah, but we need to prepare for that. So we need to do groundwork investigations. We need to do design. We need to begin with consenting. There's a whole process we need to continue with so that they can make a good decision about how they want to do that new control room.
Okay. And thank you. Around the work in progress, Ian, we receive kind of a similar update in terms of there being a large outstanding WIP on a regular basis. So, and it was raised by audit as being an area of concern. Can you talk a bit more about the risks of that outstanding, of having a large outstanding WIP?
Look, first and foremost, having an outstanding WIP balance that you're not dealing with, and I want to be crystal clear, we've got a large capital program. WIP's a legitimate accounting treatment for treating with assets prior to them being in service. So the issue we're talking about here is WIP or capital assets that are in service but have not been capitalised, therefore. So therefore, the first issue is one of depreciation and possibly understating depreciation. You'll see in the report we state the finance already are making an assessment on what that is and associated with with what we call the red WIP, the overdue WIP, and making an allowance for that depreciation expense. Now, it is an allowance, so it's not precise, but it is to ensure that we are making that we're making that acknowledgement on the operating statement, so we don't run the risk of overstating our position in that. Look, the other issues you have when you leave WIP on too long, in my opinion, a couple of things is that the data is, if you're doing asset revaluations, you want your databases to be up to date and to be as comprehensive as possible, and you run the risk that if some stuff is sitting in WIP and it hasn't been capitalised, it's getting quite old, then that your data sets may not be as accurate as you want them to be.
Yeah.
I think that's the other issue that we work through. But I think the first one and foremost is that depreciation issue, Councillor Sarah.
And do you know, what's the oldest kind of outstanding work in progress that we have?
Look, unfortunately, we have done some analysis literally in the last couple of months, and I've been talking with Gary, CFO, about this over the last couple of days, actually. Look, we do have elements of WIP that are post 24 months old, that for rhyme or reason are still sitting there that we really need to get in there and resolve, and that's really when I say the staff have got to focus on resolving that work in progress balance. It's those ones that we're really targeting, because the other element is obviously is that when you start getting into the analysis of said WIP, one thing we do sometimes discover, and you see it coming through, is that we find expenditure sitting in those capital projects that don't meet the capital definition, and therefore we have to then start to expense them, and I don't want to open that door again, but then that's when we have to take them directly out there and bring them across the operating statement. But we do have that data. I do not have it in front of me, but I'd be happy to make it available through probably through Gary, through the CFO.
Thank you, Ian. Gary, how, in regard to the allowance for depreciation, how confident are you that we're not going to end up with a surprise in terms of having underestimated that depreciation?
It's a less significant issue associated with the work in progress.
Yeah.
We are due to do asset revaluations as part of our annual reporting this year. We are working through that process of establishing what that is. You'll appreciate there's been a lot of volatility in pricing over the last 3 or 4 years, so we're looking into that. I think we have a session with Council in the next few weeks to be able to report on where we are with that prior to year end.
Okay.
So not materially concerned about the WIP depreciation issue.
Okay.
It is an issue and we can do better with it. What I would say quickly, having arrived, the process Hamilton City Council's followed is consistent with general practices over time, but there are evolving practices that continue to improve, and what Ian and I are talking about are bringing some of those into Council just to keep us up to date with current practices.
Okay, fine.
And
thank
Councillor
you.
Sarah, that meeting is set down for an information session on the 14th of May. So that should be in your diaries, and we would encourage all members to be present at that if they could. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Just the final question for me at this stage is, given the WIP was of interest to audit, do you feel confident that by the time we come round to the stage of being audited again, that would be able to show that we've addressed those concerns largely?
I believe based on where we are at the moment, we will make some improvement prior to this year-end and annual report. I believe the improvements will mostly be delivered through next year's cycle of work, because we have to catch up with the old historic information to then stay on top of the current.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, colleagues. I'm just mindful of time. I don't want to press or suppress any of your questions, but if you could keep them to the bare minimum and the most salient points, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. We've covered some pretty meaty issues in this report already with questions, so new topics I'm happy to entertain. Kia ora. Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Chair. Are any deferred projects included in the schedule of projects used to quantify DCs?
Yes, there will be.
Does the decision to defer individual projects take into consideration that money has been collected on the basis that the infrastructure will be available to benefit developments?
Look, Councillor Andrew, probably would want Greg Carstens to answer this question, but I think this has been asked before and been answered before in the same way, is that as long, a deferral is simply a timing change, so i.e. we're not stopping the project, we're still doing the project, we're just doing it in a time frame that's a little bit longer than we had wanted. Therefore, the impact on DCs is immaterial in terms of, because we're not talking about even lengthy delays of years, we're talking maybe months or 12 months at the most with delay. So I do not believe there is any material or any concerns that we should have in that space. I think your big concern would be, should the project cease completely and did not go ahead, then you would have collected DCs for a project not to go ahead. I see General Manager Blair might want to add any.
Yes, good answer.
Thank you.
I'm happy with that.
Thank you. That was a really good question. Mayor Paula.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a good question, good answer, part of mine too. But just in terms of the waters and, speculation around what the CCO may or may not do, the CCO, as I understand it, the terms of reference and all that's required of it is to give effect to our growth needs would be a priority. So a lot of this question is a lot of this water infrastructure that you're doing ahead of the CCO is required to ensure they can pick up that work at the right speed and pace for the city, or?
A lot of it is, Mayor Paula, you're right.
We did decide, didn't we? We actively decided through when we did our capital program not that long ago to retain key core infrastructure projects in the water space.
That's
We
right.
weren't going to shove them all off to the CCO in a just-in-case kind of approach. We did actively decide by this council to keep those projects in, right?
That's right.
That is correct. There's still a significant waters capital program sitting within the current LTP.
That's right, but we knew that and we decided upon it on the time. We said we weren't going to take the approach of brakes. We weren't going to put the brakes on all the water core infrastructure. We were going to carry on.
Correct.
I notice thank you, and if we held back on that work, what would the implication be, that the CCO wouldn't have the readiness to borrow and do the work on time, or it would have a significant effect on growth? Blair, what would be the implication if we did the handbrake approach to water and said, no, we're not going to do too much core stuff right now, we'll wait and see what the CCO delivers? What would be the implication of that to both the CCO and council?
Look, I'm sorry, Mayor Paul, it would depend on the projects that you are talking about, but there are some significant projects that are important.
Well, I presume the reason that we staff advise that we keep them in the capital, because they are all important.
Yeah, and I'm linking back to the conversation at the Strategic Growth Committee, where there is a critical range of Three Waters projects which are fundamental to continuing the support for growth in the city, both in brownfield and in greenfield and at headworks, and I believe those are still in the program.
So that, to be absolutely clear on that, my final question on that one is then, it would be against staff advice to remove any of those core water projects at this time, or delay?
And I don't believe they are being changed.
No, they're not.
So we'll deliver the projects over the next 15 months, and then, as I was saying to Councillor Ewan's question, then the water strategy, which is essentially being developed by our and Waikato District Council staff, will then transfer to the CCO, and they'll be obliged under the Statement of Expectations to deliver those. So I think you're okay, Mayor Paula.
Yeah, so I just wanted to be clear for that, on that, is that we didn't really have a choice to kind of hold back on any capital investment at this time, pending whatever a CCO may or may not do, did we?
Correct. You've only got a choice over the next 15 months, apart from our choice of what we put in the Statement of Expectations.
That's right. I just noticed that some of those things that would sit outside of the CCO, they would be the shared services portion of what we might do with the CCO, because they're stormwater, aren't they? There's an incredible amount of stormwater as well. Is that right?
There is stormwater in the capital program, yes.
Yeah, and that wouldn't necessarily, outside of shared services agreement, be a CCO matter, but we've still got to provide stormwater services, right?
That's right.
Correct, and if you don't mind me just reiterating the point, we've raised it before, and I know General Manager Andrew is very keen on this. You know, we entered into quite a innovative PDA just quite recently to do with the Rotokowri waterway. Now that's a significant, and I'm not an engineer, but that's a significant piece of stormwater infrastructure required to open up that growth cell. And the way they've done that is we've got the contractor out there building that infrastructure now for us, and we don't actually start making our payments until year 4 in our current LTP, once they become affordable under our financial strategy. So that's a great example of being able to get growth infrastructure on the ground now, working with the developer market as opposed to being constrained by HCC's financial position.
Thank you, that's very helpful. I was just trying to confirm that the advice that we were given staff to sort of hold steady course with the investment, the capital investment that we got was the correct one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. Thank you for your questions. Just one for me to you, Lance, in terms of the statement of expectation for the Waters CCO. That's a document that, as you say, will be compiled with both Waikato and Hamilton City Council's expectations, but it's also something that this council will have to endorse. That's correct, isn't it?
Correct.
And that it will come through Mayor Paula's all-of-council committee.
Correct.
And we'll have the opportunity
and I can't remember the timeframes, but there is a schedule of those over the next, weeks, to be honest. Yeah.
Thank you. So it's not a document that's being put behind the scenes that we don't get overview of. Yeah, thank you. Now, I have online Deputy Mayor Angela. Thank you. And I think I can hope that this will be the last of the questions, and then, Councillor Anna after that. Thank you.
Chair, just two questions, just following along from Councillor Wilson's line of questioning. Just firstly, process, Chair, did I hear you say that there was a workshop coming around the deferrals? Was that correct? Was it something else?
With regard to the revaluation.
Someone put her microphone on, please.
Oh, I beg your pardon. No, that is with regard to the revaluations, not.
Oh, okay.
Not that.
Okay. So just following on from Councillor Wilson's line of questioning, he moved from are you confident to how, but the answer that we heard around how are we confident that we can deliver that program in future years was just yes. I'm wondering, without delaying the meeting, I'm really concerned about this level of work. Can we have in a briefing or an email some more information around exactly how and what are the mechanisms to why we're so confident? I guess my questions would be, do we have the staff? Do we have the contractors? Is the supply chain there? Like, how are we confident?
Thank you. Do I hand that back to you, Kelly and Ian?
Well, what would you like, Chair Max? Would you like a workshop, or would you like me to give a brief answer?
It's not a short answer, really, what I'm looking for. I'm really looking for more confidence in the detail rather than just, yes, I think we can deliver it, or...
Okay, thank you. Ian and Kelly, was it?
Can I jump in and pick that up, Madam Chair?
You can.
I think probably like this meeting is about this financial year. I think what we're starting to talk about is really the annual plan coming up and what we're going to deliver in year 2 and 3. So I think we can pick up that question, Councillor Angela, and deal with it. We'll talk to governance about how we just wind that in. But you know, our thinking about what we can deliver in year 2 and year 3 is really forming our annual plan discussions, and you know, we'll come forward with an annual plan for year 2 of what we are confident in delivering, and by default there'll be a year 3 program to talk about. So I'll talk with the annual plan team of how we might progress that discussion with elected members.
Thank you, Chris. Deputy Mayor, does that help you with your concerns?
Yeah, I'm happy with that, as long as we get a clear line of sight. That's fine to do it in the annual plan. I have one more question, just on Embassy Park on the activity sheet. I'm not sure if the General Manager is in the house there, but I was just looking for confidence that we've resolved all of the issues around the distinction of responsibility that's been going on for a little while around the design details and stuff?
Yes.
Is that sorted?
Yeah, happy to respond to that. Look, the copy and the report is slightly old. Everything is all go and we're on a clear trajectory.
Excellent news. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, good to hear. Last question from Councillor Anna.
Yeah, kia ora. Just in regards to the capitalisation of assets, I guess I'm just curious as to is there an issue around staff capacity in relation to that work? I'm just conscious the vacancy factor in the next report is quite talked of. Is that an issue?
It's a function of the capital program.
It is. The capital program is large. No, we're not carrying any vacancies in that space. I think it's a product of the complexity of the capitalisation process and breaking the assets down into the various assets that then have to go through an asset management system, whether it be a RAM system or an IPS, and just doing that analysis. I think one of the things we are finding at the moment, which is causing a little bit of a blockage, is there is that, particularly in our water assets, there's a little bit of we're on a hold pattern because of the asset revaluation that you've heard us talk about earlier, and so that's holding us back a little bit as well. But I don't think it is. Again, there's been even as recently as in the last month, there's been another process review, looked at the whole WIP process to try and understand what that process is. You heard Gary mention earlier about the way we're doing it at the moment standard, but there are other ways that we could probably look to streamline it and to take some of the inefficiency out maybe, because we don't want to compromise the end game, because it's critical we get those assets identified correctly at the right level, because it's not just the depreciation, it's the asset planning and the asset maintenance of those going forward that's critical, so that we know what assets we own or what we need to do to operate and maintain them. So yeah, but I think so. But that was a long way of saying I don't believe it is. No,
Thank
sorry.
you. That's helpful.
Thanks for cutting yourself short. I appreciate that.
I was telling myself stop, Ian, stop.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, happy to move this item. And I just had one quick question around further information coming back to us. We had that briefing last week, but the slides were quite high level, just in terms of that activity plan and what we'd say are the top priorities versus things that may be able to be shifted in terms of the water CCO. Having that detail would be great to at some point, whether it's through the annual plan or the next finance meeting.
Yep, so that some of that detail is in the annual planning process.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Excellent, that's enough to satisfy your concerns around that, and Deputy Mayor Angela's, and Chris, we'll leave that in your hands to be able to schedule that for our work. That's the end of our questions for now. I have noted Councillor Sierra to move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And do you have debate, Councillor Sierra?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, thank you again to the staff for your response to last finance meeting when we asked about having a closer look at the deferrals and what is realistic to deliver over the next few years. I do think it would be very helpful to now see the details of that third year, particularly in regard to water. We have some massive constraints, particularly in terms of our wastewater, that are of high interest to the community, and so I'm keen to make sure that we are pushing as hard as we can to get those particular critical projects delivered. But it was also encouraging to hear there were, in terms of looking at ways to phase that program, there were projects that could be pushed out a little more, like the control room, that won't affect the ability to enable growth. So yeah, just keen to see those details. And also I'm interested in further updates on how we are going around improving the work in progress. Just the main concern for me is that if things sit in there too long, we might not get a fully accurate view of the finances, particularly around depreciation. So keen to really see how further steps that we're taking to get that in better shape for the next financial year. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, did you wish to remark?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I'll start on the same subject, year 3, and the issues of deferrals. I mean, I'm concerned, and I think I'm concerned at the fact that we have significant deferrals currently that weren't projected not that long ago, and that erodes my confidence in staff's projections. And then I look at year 3 and it's the doubling of the quantum, and I don't hear a really clear plan. And so I look forward to hearing the details. I'm also confused with the argument that the uncertainty is over the waters, where we've clearly stipulated, we've clearly said we are ploughing ahead with our water projects, and once they start, they then become the obligation of the CCO to finish. So I'm not convinced by this narrative that there should be this uncertainty. I also want to turn my mind to the portfolio risk, and I really found the report today, in my opinion, not overly helpful, and it left more questions unanswered, and I appreciate the staff's apology. But we've got to get better at presenting information that doesn't lead to multiple questions and then staff apologies, right? We've got to be clearer in what we deliver. So we highlight a potential risk, and the report says this will have a significant impact on the balancing of the books, but then we finally ask some more questions and we're told, actually, no, if it's historic, then staff couldn't immediately tell us of the quantum they put, which was historic. And so that is not helpful. We've got to get better at getting this information.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Bidder.
Yeah, I understand and support the need for deferments to manage council workload and finances. I also understand why some developers feel they are carrying unfair risk and costs. Ian's response to my question showed a good understanding of the issue, particularly around cancelled projects, so thank you. However, deferrals are not entirely immaterial. A delay of a year that holds up a developer who's paying 14% second-tier finance wipes out their entire profit or gets passed on to the end user. So when prioritising projects, there is a need to consider this impact. That's it.
Thank you, and thank you for being so succinct. Lovely. Just a couple of comments from me. Thank you, Ian and Kelly, for your willingness to be working with this committee to grow our understanding and deepen our knowledge on all matters capital projects, and for Chris and the team for listening to us and providing that 9th of April opportunity for us to be really across what our capital works program across that 3-year timing and phasing might look like. We know that the landscape is really shifting, and especially with the opportunity of our waters, the possible water CCO coming on board and taking over their own investment and procurement program, that does make it quite a significant change, and it offers us the opportunity perhaps to mitigate some of council's exposure in future years, certainly around unplanned and unfunded growth. So that those risks might otherwise divert our limited resources away from critical other priorities. I think, it's a real reality that we shouldn't act in haste, but take our time to be able to work through these issues and understand the complexities of the uncertainty and change that we're in. This is the biggest change that local government will face, certainly in the next decade. So taking a slow and careful approach is absolutely something I would endorse. That's it from me. councillor of, I beg your pardon, Deputy Mayor online. It's always a bit tricky with online people for me to have eyes everywhere, so my apology to you.
It's okay. There's also apparently now there's no button to raise your hand. I have to do it like this until the screen sees it. So a little bit of AI tech there. Thank you. Thanks to staff for the good report. We've always managed deferrals in this way in my time, certainly on council. However, the incremental creep is what concerns me and the impact of that. And it's not insignificant. Pushing this amount of work into future years on the face of it feels unrealistic. We are simply not getting ahead of deferrals. And then I think during that time, we are going in the next 12 to 18 months, we possibly could have more deferrals. For me, it's the literal definition of kicking the can down the road. It's important, and I do take into account the context with all the work that we're doing with waters and what that might look like, but I'm not seeing any humbling of the work program, and I think we're going to come unstuck. I don't understand if we have the staff, I don't understand if we have the contractors, and I don't actually understand if the supply chain is in place to tackle this. So given the level of deferrals keeps increasing, I think it's time we might need to take a little bit of a realistic approach to our capital work program. But I thank and look for staff, and I look forward to seeing what opportunities, if any, we might want to take up in the annual plan process to address this. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, a reply, Councillor Sarah? Oh, I beg your pardon. Mayor Paula.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the debate and the conversation. This is a very important issue, and I absolutely support Deputy Mayor Angela's comments around deferrals, and I'd also add to that maintenance and renewals are vital, because otherwise we go backwards, we slip backwards. It becomes 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards as a city. It should come as no surprise to anyone that we have a bow wave of capital expenditure, especially in the water. The Infrastructure Commission has made that quite clear, with a $300 billion deficit across New Zealand in capital infrastructure for water. And so that tells you something about what the state of where we're at. You have to crack some eggs to make an omelette. We do have to put core infrastructure in place to be ready for the growth the city is experiencing, and to build those much needed houses and places for business and so on. However, I'm confident, with the questions asked today, I'm confident, and we did go into it eyes wide open. We did keep those capital projects in there for a reason, because we were told of their strategic importance for growth and the need. They are core infrastructure, not nice to have. So we did keep them in there. And so we have to keep that balance between what we can afford to do and what we must do, carefully considering both aspects, I think. Last thing I was going to say is that I believe you're right. The creation of a council-controlled organisation for waters will be the biggest change this council has seen in decades. They will have the opportunity to borrow in a completely different way, in a much more bold way, to deliver core infrastructure. Hopefully that will see much more growth enabled in our city. We've heard recently from developers who are frustrated, quite rightly, about lack of connections to wastewater infrastructure. The one that is huge is stormwater, and we've got to be mindful that we have to deal with our stormwater. It's not included in Water's Done Well, but it's a huge cost for the city to deal with. So yes, look, we're under pressure, but we need to ask the good questions about what we're spending, and Angela's questions are valid. Make sure we can deliver the work that we've got in front of us, but we must go forward and deliver some of this core infrastructure.
Thank you. No right or reply needed. Let's take that to the vote. A show of hands. All those in favour? Against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Everybody. Okay, item number 8, and we welcome to the chair Sarah from our finance team. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, and thanks for your email exchange yesterday, highlighting and being able to clarify some confusion between some elected members. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And we'll leave you to introduce your report. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair, councillors. So yes, we had a few questions on the graphs on page 55. Now we did talk about this a little bit in last meeting about how the terms of the reference for the committee relate to performance against the LTP, and therefore we have to look at that because we don't have an annual plan that is actually agreed to or approved as yet. We have to look back towards LTP, and then we make some adjustments based on some of the things that we know, but anything that sort of requires a decision of council in order to be changed is not changed in that graph. So that's what you'll see in the green adjusted LTP position, which shows a 3 million deficit in year 3. However, all the adjustments that we make in the annual plan, inflation, interest, all the rest of it, will result in that achieving the balancing the books in year 3, which is shown in the orange graph, which my apologies does say is labelled 26-27 rather than 25-26, but that's the orange series. So hopefully that clarifies it for everyone. So I'll keep this reasonably short and sweet, hopefully. So we started the year with an outlook for balancing the books deficit of 56 mil, and operational performance is positive with a forecast of $6.4 million better than budget. The lower capital spend is resulting in a lower debt and therefore has had an impact on that performance, but interest rates are stable compared to where we were budgeting them. The business has been really focused on achieving operational efficiencies whilst maintaining levels of service. There's continued focus on maintaining those efficiencies and identifying savings in Q4. The work to confirm the timing and the final values of critical program expenditure, particularly in digital services and a couple of other key contracts, is indicating that Q4 should result in at least this result, if not better. So looking positive. In regards to the losses on swaps, the losses are not concerning. So with the drop in the OCR from 5.5% to 3.75% so far this year, losses on Treasury instruments are being reported across the board. You look through any of your NZX companies, Auckland Council, everyone's reporting losses. That is just a drop in the market rate from where it was to where it is now. So it's just across the board. So our swaps are achieving their long-term objectives, and this loss is just an accounting entry to evaluate the value of the interest swap at any given point in time. And
just to add to that, the issue with swaps is a impact of a single year versus the fact that the ups and downs against. So we try to provide certainty and protection against volatility. That's the objective of the swaps. You will see the benefit of that protection over a longer period of time. You will not see it in a single year. So for example, between 2018 and 2024, we've had $38 million worth of gains reported in our annual reports. In fact, between 2021 and 2024, which is the period where we've had this most volatility, as you'll appreciate, with interest rates going up and then starting to come down, we've had about $65 million worth of gains. So now we are just seeing the swing to the other side of the stability. Hope that makes sense.
And just noting that swaps also have a life of about up to 7 years. So you can't just, you've got to look over the entire period, not just a single period. That's all from me. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Excellent explanations, and thanks for that clarification around the swaps. It always looks a bit scary as a number on the page, but having your explanations really helps us to understand the longer term benefit of swaps. To questions, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah. My question is paragraph 45 and 46. Where it talks about depreciation and the valuation of the water's assets and infrastructure, which was alluded to in the earlier item. it made me a little bit nervous how it was written, talking about it could potentially result in a significant shift in depreciation renewal funding. So in terms of what's coming to us in that workshop, is that already accounted for in our projections for the rest of the financial year?
It is included in our forecast for the current year, yes.
All right, thank you. So I just wanted to confirm we weren't waiting to get a bad shock when we got to that workshop, I guess. Okay.
So for clarity, Councillor Thompson, we have not yet identified the exact impact on that annual plan for next year.
Right.
And that's probably the area where we need to provide additional information and put that into context around the life of the renewals of those assets.
So it's, at the moment, is it looking like we are going to see a greater shift in depreciation than what we had forecasted in the LTP?
I think we need to finish doing the work before we come to you in the workshop.
Okay. All right, I'll wait for that. Thank you. Oh, that's all. Thank you.
That's all. Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Maxine. Morning, Sarah. Just starting on page 55, the balancing of the books, and thank you for the explanation. It was very helpful. The assumption where you've landed that with the annual plan, it will come back to zero, as in no deficit, as in we balance our books. What decisions have you used to have determined that outcome?
There's multiple things that go into the movements of that. There's movement in interest rates, there's movement in the timing of projects, any changes in the capital program, deferrals will impact obviously interest costs, depreciation costs, all of that stuff. So it's not one single thing, and all those assumptions are obviously brought to council for approval during the annual plan.
So these are workings that you've done?
Yes, well, they were what was presented to you at council on 11th of February.
Right. And you're then just extrapolating and assuming that would be where the annual plan lies, and if it does, then that what the result will be?
Yes.
Right. Would it have been a more fiscally responsible approach to have made some earlier decisions regarding some of our expenditure or decisions in the last 12 months when we started to become aware of the fact that we were going to end up, at least with the adjusted LTP, with a deficit?
Those are decisions for council to make.
Right, so they are decisions for us to make.
So to clarify, Councillor Wilson, the identification of the LTP balancing the books was agreed by council in LTP. We are currently projecting for this current year to perform better than what was agreed by council in the LTP, and we are projecting to be on track with what was agreed by council in the annual plan for 25-26 at the moment.
So you're saying that you have a great deal of confidence that at the end of year 3 that we will run a surplus?
I am saying that the deficits that you're referencing were agreed within the long-term plan.
Right, and that was a surplus?
No, the deficits for 26-27, it was balancing the books of 0.
Yes. Yep.
27-28, we have a surplus.
Sure. So the target was 0, so that we were balancing our books, and so you're confirming that you believe that will happen?
I'm confirming based on the information available to me at the moment, yes, but obviously that is still some time away. So there are likely to be other changes that can impact on that. I cannot provide certainty and guarantees into the future, Councillor Wilson.
Final question, just regarding the accounting surplus / deficit, in this case of 15.1 million. on the swaps. Just remind me the breakdown between the swaps component and the property and plant. Yeah. Yeah.
The forecast swap value is 9.6 million and the loss on property is 2.9 million.
Can you explain to me on the property and plant losses what they were and why?
I don't have a breakdown of that here, so I wouldn't be able to comment. I'd have to go back and look at that information for you.
Can anyone shed any light? Madam Chair, can you shed any light as to what that's made up of?
I don't have that level of detail. Sarah, how might we be able to communicate that to members?
Yes, we can come back with information, with the list of information following this meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Ewan, is that information welcome to you via an email?
Yes, absolutely. Madam Chair, again, it would have been so helpful.
Thank you.
If we just had that in the report. Accounting surplus, or in this case deficit, 15.1, broken down into the areas with an explanation.
And while I recognise that, sometimes if we put all of that information in, we might be looking at lots and lots of pages of information, but
Madam Chair,
acknowledge that there's a balance between getting the information.
I totally agree. I absolutely agree. Yep. One would assume that a $15 million deficit would probably trigger the requirement for explanation.
Some detail. Thank you. And if you could note that for future reports.
Yeah, they're usually in the activity statements, if there's any material items within each of the activities, that's usually noted within those activity statements. So, but, you know, there is kind of a materiality consideration there as to whether we'd comment on it or not. Noted.
Thank you. Councillor McIndoe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
You start. Can I just note that we're at 10:45. We had hoped to be able to have this report done and dusted by now, but acknowledge there's lots of questions and some debate still to happen. Can we look to be aiming for 11 or a little after 11 to be finishing this item so that we can enjoy some morning tea with our guest and then have his report? Is that agreeable to members? Lots of nods. Thank you, folks. So if we can keep, I beg your pardon, our questions really brief and then can move on with the rest of our meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I actually had quite a few questions, but I've received answers prior to this meeting, which means that I won't need to ask all of them. But Sarah, could I just have a look at paragraph 13 on page 48 under operating expenditure, excluding interest and depreciation? It's 6.1 million. It's not a huge figure in the grand scheme of things, but I note the comment favourability due to the high level of staff vacancies at the start of the year as future fit changes were embedded and cost efficiencies achieved across rubbish and digital contracts. Are you able to just explain to us a little bit more what were the cost efficiencies across rubbish contracts? Maybe a difficult one off the top of the head, but are you aware of how this has come about?
We had a new contract and we budgeted for costs for rubbish, and the costs have come in slightly under based on, you know, the household service and that, but I would probably want to refer that question to
it may even be for another committee, but what I'm really getting at, has it come at a cost of a reduction in actual rubbish services for ratepayers?
No.
You're confident of that?
Yes, it's a
because
matter
we do,
of cost.
Anecdotally, we do get reports from time to time.
Councillor Tim, just on the digital, and I think you've probably heard Alan Lightbourne, who's our manager in that space, and there's been a number of contracts that have come through to this committee and also council. Alan's done a really good job in renegotiating a lot of the service contracts around our IT systems, basically, and he's very experienced in that field. He's a good negotiator, and he's eked out some really good savings. So I think it's an area where we can reflect even further across the council with his skill set.
And that would be encouraging if it can be, so thank you for that. And as I mentioned, I did have some questions that I wanted to put about total debt and trends in that debt over a number of years and the interest payments. Because Sarah has very helpfully, and I appreciate this, provided this information for me this morning, can I just ask, to ensure that I've got the figure right, that if we look back to the end of 2019, that at that stage our debt as a city was just a shade over 433 million, I'm reading that correctly, and that interest at that stage payable, and you've given me the weekly finance cost, but if you multiply that over 52 weeks of the year, the interest therefore was just a shade over $18 million at that stage?
I haven't extrapolated that out,
Right.
but assuming you've done that's right.
And I guess what I am very concerned about is the fact that if we come forward to the latest figure available for the 31st of March, to the 31st of March 2025, can you confirm that that has seen city debt increase to 1.25 billion? That's just a shade over.
Yeah, the figures generally provided in the strategy graph, you mean, are year-end figures as opposed to March figures? But
I'm
this
really
one
just trying
is-
to get it, and that as a consequence of multiplying out the weekly finance cost, that takes interest to over $63.5 million.
Forecast interest of 60 million this year.
Councillor Tim,
I
I've been letting you come along with this. I'm just wondering about how it's relevant to our reporting today. Is that something you've got a question with?
This is the Finance and Monitoring Committee, Madam Chair. If we don't have a chance to ask these questions here, we don't get many opportunities.
Thank you.
But I'm satisfied with the answers I've received.
Can I make what I think it is important clarification when we are talking about debt? So although that debt has increased, and I do recognise the significance of that, it is important to recognise that's on the back of $1.1 billion worth of investment in assets for growth and levels of service during that same period of time. So those decisions to deliver those assets backed by debt is critical to understand. I think it's also important to recognise that that enables us to achieve funding on an intergenerational basis. I think we would all love to avoid interest, but sometimes that is part of the choice of delivering assets.
Thank you. Councillor Tim, any further
thank you.
inquiry? No. Excellent. Councillor Casey Cox.
Thank you, Sarah. I understand there is some variability between councils and the depreciation rates they apply to different assets. I just wondered if you understand why there is that variability, particularly with water infrastructure assets.
The variability will be because of how different councils necessarily classify various assets, like particularly around plant and equipment. There can be quite varying ways that you classify plant and equipment. So whether you classify your computers as plant and equipment or whether you classify them separately with something else. So when you're looking at ranges of each type of asset, it will depend just what is included in there. So it's not that maybe a computer is depreciated with a different life from council to council, but which classification within their financial statements might vary as to where that sits. So then you're going to end up with some variances like that.
Oh, okay. Well, that's helpful. Just in terms of the vacancy factor, which this might not be to you, but I guess one of the things I'm interested in is a kind of GM reflection on how that vacancy factor plays out, because I'm concerned to read how it's reflected in these reports in terms of being favourable when we have a full team that's functioning and unfavourable when we have, vacancies, which I understand from an accounting perspective. I'm just interested to know how that plays out in reality for GMs. Is that something that could be reported on back to us?
Plays out in what way?
I guess, what it means for them in terms of their workloads and achieving some of our planned projects, really. Yeah. I'm just concerned at the way it's reported.
Vacancy factor has fallen quite significantly since July when we had Future Fit, and there was still quite a bit of, positions that were unfilled or had not been refilled. It's certainly fallen since that point quite significantly, and I think we're back down to quite a reasonable rate. As far as workloads, absolutely vacancy factors, or vacancies have an impact. However, it is very normal for an organisation of this size to be operating with a certain level of vacancies just due to general turnover.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed in one of the sheets the vacancy factor was not being achieved.
Yeah.
And it was going to result in other funding being cut. So I'm just, that's where I'm interested in that way.
We operate budgets as a whole, and so you've got a vacancy factor over the whole of the organisation. So you will have some parts that operate with a lower vacancy factor than others. And as we get more critical data, we'll be able to adjust that information to a activity or group level.
Okay. I'm not sure. I feel like I need more information on this issue, so I'm not sure if that's an action that could be taken. Just some more reporting back to us on vacancy factor and how it plays out. And I mean, in terms of that, what's cut to make it possible and how it's juggled by our general managers.
I wonder if that's something that a chief executive could take up through your executive reporting.
Yeah, look, I'll give it some thought. I'll be really honest. The more reporting you want, then that will soak up time of, people, and we're pretty busy at the moment. Like Three Waters is all consuming, and I'm not trying to be difficult or anything like that, but I'll give it some thought, and I'll catch up with you offline about it and
thank you.
How we can do that in an efficient way that provides you the information you want, but doesn't create a whole lot more angst, which is probably to your point, and more workload for people. So
it's a concern around the impacts on productivity and efficiency. Actually,
I get that, and thanks for the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. Thanks, Sarah. A couple more questions, team, and we're bumping up to 11, so just mindful of that. Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Chair. Quick questions. Sarah, graphs are a great visual aid. The balancing the books graph on page 55. So the orange bar going forward is post Two Waters shifting out.
Correct.
So the difference between the green bars and the orange bars, is that primarily due to HCC not receiving rates for the water, the wastewater and drinking water services?
Yes, there is obviously quite a difference between the inclusion of waters and the exclusion of waters.
Yeah. And secondly, the orange bar, the surplus going forward, is that used to repay debt?
Debt repayments are required based on our debt requirements. Surplus is, we reprocess debt as required, and considering the amount of growth investment that we're making, it is likely to result in less debt being drawn down other than the debt that we repay on a normal cycle.
Yeah. So there's significant difference between the green bars and the orange bars going forward. Is that reducing our ability to repay debt?
Not, it's in proportion to our debt repayment ability, and that's where our debt to revenue comes into play.
Yeah.
Councillor, if you recall, the debt associated with waters transfers with the assets,
right.
so the relationship is consistent. Understanding the impact of cash benefits on external debt versus the timing of how we manage treasury is important. A lot of those surpluses are a function of establishing future funding into renewals. They enable us to reduce debt externally on a temporary basis, but it is important we recognise the need to then return that funding to reinvest in renewals in the future.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, colleagues. It looks like the end of our questions. Excellent. Thank you, Sarah, for your excellent reporting and very competent answering our inquiry and questions. I'm happy to move the report, and I see Councillor Maria nodding, so she'll second for us. Are there any burning debates that are needed to be had around this after our full questioning? I'm happy to forego any debate if you are. Alrighty, then let's put that directly to the vote. All those in favour with a raised hand, and against? Thank you, colleagues. Let's take a short break. I'm going to say come back at 10 past. That gives us the opportunity, and welcome Andrew to our meeting, Andrew Mickle from LGFA. He'll be joining us for morning tea. And remember, folks, get in early for Councillor Louise's slice. Kia ora. We'll see you back at 10 past. Colleagues, come and take your seats and we'll move on with the rest of our meeting. We've got a quorum and we are now up to item 9. Can I welcome to the chamber Andrew Mickle from LGFA, and Andrew will be presenting today the 6-monthly report from LGFA and has a presentation to share with us, colleagues. Andrew, I'll hand the meeting over to you.
Thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you. Okay, so you're going to drive the slides. Okay, thank you. So maybe the first slide. So just the highlights over sort of recent years. So in particular, just draw your attention to the lending in the 12 months to June 2024 was over $6 billion. So that's the financing that LGFA has provided to the sector. If we go back a few years, it was in the order of sort of $1.5 to $2 billion. So there's certainly been a significant increase in demand for financing from the sector, and that's what LGFA's been able to meet. In terms of developments, last year we launched our issuance program in Australian dollars, and this year we've issued debt into the US market, into the euro market, and also to the Swiss franc market. So around 60% of our financing is now coming from offshore. That's all being hedged back into New Zealand dollars, so there's no sort of currency risk associated with that, but it just means LGFA's been able to get a more diversified sources of financing, which is good against a background where sector debt in 2008 was about $4 billion. It's currently around $30 billion, and based on the LTPs, it's going to about $55 billion in 10 years' time. So getting a wider range of access to different financial markets has been sort of important. And right down the bottom, I just also, in terms of new product and initiatives, just give you a very quick update on the Ratepayers Assistance Scheme, which I know you've been associated with. But we've had, sort of positive news from the Minister of Local Government that, in principle, they are keen to see it move forward. So there's going to be sort of a working party sort of put together to progress that. So hopefully this year we will see some progress with the Ratepayer Assistance Scheme, which I think offers some pretty positive outcomes for ratepayers in terms of optionality. So the next slide. Again, I just wanted to highlight the importance to LGFA of the Shareholders' Council. So it is quite a unique structure that we have, but we have a group of councils that make up the Shareholders' Council that send the letter of expectation to LGFA, but also provide a lot of strategic input, and I'll come to that. But just want to acknowledge the role of sort of David Bryant, his contributions, and now Gary on the Shareholder Council and the role that they play in driving the business model of LGFA. So the next slide. I'll go through the 6-monthly results and the SOI quite quickly, and then maybe I'll talk more about a couple of the big strategic initiatives, because that's probably going to provide you with more value. So in terms of the 6-monthly results, there's really no surprises. We're pretty much on track in terms of our profitability, in terms of our expenses coming out sort of just below budget, maintaining our sort of credit rating. So it's all pretty much business as usual, maintaining over 80% market share. So we're currently running around 87% of all council lending. So it's all, and the other one is our satisfaction from members was 94% versus our target of 85%. So again, the LGFA member councils and member CCOs are pleased in terms of LGFA's ability to deliver financing in a cost-efficient manner. So next slide, and next slide. But I'm happy to take any questions on the 6 monthly results or SOI. And next slide. So we could just go to the statement of intent. So again, we've released the draft statement of intent at the end of February. We'll get feedback from shareholders and release the final SOI at the end of June. Again, there's not any significant change other than the couple of strategic issues which I will sort of talk to. But again, just that top right-hand box, which is our shareholder funds and borrower notes as a percentage of assets, you can see the improvement going forward in our shareholder fund base. And that's really important from a rating agency perspective for maintaining LGFA's AAA credit rating, is that we do have a strong level of shareholders' funds in the context of a growing lending book. Next slide. So we'll skip over the SOIs. Keep going and keep going. So I'll talk a little bit about the financial performance, but again, happy to take any questions on the targets in the draft SOI. But again, there's no real major changes to what there has been in the last few years. In terms of the financials, the one big change is the profitability looking forward. So historically, LGFA's had a profit of around $10 million a year, and we've sort of been tried to keep it at that. But in the context of a deteriorating council ratings, and I've got a slide on those, it was one of the important things to demonstrate to S&P was that LGFA's profitability was increasing, because that adds strength to our credit rating. So going forward, that increases to around $20 million a year. But as a shareholder, you benefit in terms of your own, most of those profits are retained in the business, but again, as a shareholder, you benefit from the increase in equity value. And again, if you look at total assets, again, they continue to keep rising in the context of increased council borrowing as councils continue on a relatively high capex sort of program. And you can see water loans coming in to the picture. That is really hard to forecast because a lot of that's really out of our control, but we did put in some numbers to represent lending to water CCOs. So next slide. I'll just talk about the couple of strategic issues, because this might add value into what the LGFA board and the LGFA Shareholder Council thinking was. So last year there was two strategic issues. The first was the water reforms, and how does LGFA help councils sort of deliver on the water reforms. So just, one thing to remember with water reforms is they're not voluntary. The water standards are something that all councils are going to be required to comply with. Personally, I think, having looked at modelling, there is some challenges in terms of affordability, but nevertheless, regardless of that, councils have to put in place a model that complies with the water reforms. So for LGFA and the sector, it was how did LGFA adopt its business model to cater for that? So we came up with the lending to water CCOs. I've got a slide on that later, so happy to talk on that. but in aggregate it means more debt, more leverage, which creates greater risk in terms of the LGFA's balance sheet and is putting downward pressure on council credit ratings. The second one was how did LGFA or how does the sector cope with growth and in particular high growth? So as part of that, LGFA made a change last year following feedback from the Shareholder Council so that the covenants, which were 280% net debt to revenue, were increased to 350%. So that's something that high growth councils can apply to do. So while it's increasing the level of risk, it's in the context that, you know, the 280% was one covenant for all councils, but the change recognises that not all councils are the same. Some have a lot more growth requirements to invest in sort of growth infrastructure. So we needed some flexibility to be able to allow councils with high growth aspirations to put the infrastructure in place. The reality, when we can see it with Tauranga, is Tauranga was going to borrow anyway, regardless of whether it would borrow from LGFA. It would borrow through the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act. And according to Tauranga, the cost of that financing was about an additional 2% higher than LGFA financing. So LGFA providing the extra flexibility simply allows councils to do what they were going to do anyway, but in a more affordable way for ratepayers. To date, the LGFA boards approved 2 council applications, which was Tauranga and Waipa, but the board set a whole lot of conditions as that. So just to highlight, there is a lot of monitoring that perhaps you don't see that is going on, and a lot of conditions that were attached to that sort of high growth. So there is that extra level of due diligence that sort of comes with that. So they were the 2 strategic issues we had to deal with. If we made no other changes, there would have been downward pressure on LGFA's credit rating, and that, in the view of the LGFA board, wouldn't have been good for the sector. So what we did was increase the lending margin by 5 basis points, which, you know, so that's a cost to council members that are borrowing. And the other change we made was increasing the amount of borrow notes when you sort of borrow. So those 2 changes were integral in demonstrating to S&P that LGFA was taking measures to strengthen its own balance sheet, which provides an offset against the deteriorating council ratings. So if we go to the next slide, and you can see the 40 council ratings there, but in March this year, S&P downgraded the ratings on 18 councils, including Hamilton. LGFA is not concerned about that because we see the reasons for the downward ratings is simply because councils are borrowing more to deliver larger capex programs. So to some extent that is a cyclical issue, even though, you know, we're talking like a 10-year time frame rather than sort of 1-2 year sort of time frame. So the measures LGFA took meant it could keep its own AAA credit rating in the context of lower individual council ratings. So next slide. The balanced budget outcomes are something LGFA pays a lot of attention to. This is the average outcome for councils. So while council debt is rising, this graph that demonstrates that over the last sort of 12 years up until last year, councils on average have been having more operating income than operating expenses, which is a positive thing because it demonstrates that any increase in debt is being used for capital expenditure not for operating purposes. We're not too hung up on any individual year what a council's outcome is, because we know shocks do happen, but we certainly recognise that there's been a deterioration the last few years. 2021 and 22 were better outcomes because a lot of one-off government funding was given to the sector, so that's artificially high numbers. But the increase in costs that councils face, the big one being depreciation charges, the others probably being higher interest rates, higher insurance costs, but higher everything really. So it got to a stage where it's now below 100, so we do think that the sector has to take measures to address that. And by and large, I think with the LTPs, most councils put in place financial strategies that would see them getting back to surpluses within the next sort of year or two. And lastly, I'll just talk about the water reforms. So there's been a lot of talk going on, and we've looked at a lot of different models, had a lot of discussions with councils. From what we're seeing and based on sort of consultation, and this can change, we're probably looking at about 14 water CCOs being created. But that still leaves over 30 councils doing in-house water services. So we're going to end up with, 30 plus, 14 CCOs. So we've got, 45 to 50 water entities essentially. So when you think the Water Industries Commission of Scotland, and they do more global consulting than anyone else around the world, preferred option was 4. They thought that was the most optimal model. We're still going to be a long way from that. So we can see the reforms, further amalgamation in time is highly likely in order to drive cost efficiencies. But if you want to, happy to answer any questions on the water reforms, but more than happy to come back and have more discussions with you when you have more time if you'd like to on that. But LGFA is working very collaboratively with DIA. They've been very good in sharing information. So we'll see what sort of happens over the next few months in terms of the water service delivery plans. And very lastly, last page, just sustainability. It is a big internal focus for LGFA. Again, happy to answer any questions on that or come back and talk to you about what we're sort of doing. But again, we're working with quite a few councils on climate action loans and sustainable sort of lending products. And there's certainly going to be more opportunities with water CCOs to do sustainable lending in that space. So I'll finish there.
Thank you, Andrew. Excellent presentation. A lot of information in there for us to be able to get our heads around, so thank you for that. Going to the board for questions, I have Mayor Southgate.
Thank you very much for updating us on your presentation. Always keen to see how it's progressing. Just in terms of the 18 councils that were down-rated in Standard & Poor's, most of that was reflected in the metro sector with their high capital investment. Is that right? Was that what you've seen, or am I assuming that?
Not Auckland Council wasn't downgraded, but most of the rest of the metro sector was. I would suggest that over time it's going to be across the whole sector. I think the metros are probably ahead of some of the provincials and certainly the rurals in terms of their CapEx programs. So they've been working or doing more in recent years, and therefore their debt levels are more elevated, and as a consequence you're seeing the downgrades. But when you look at the water reforms and some of those rural councils about what's required, some of those forward-looking financial strategies for a few of the rural councils are a little bit sort of scary. So there's got to be question marks about, the affordability of their CapEx programs.
So a lot more of that will be potentially known once the government has made its decision on the water services plans that are submitted in September. If they come back and reject some of the plans or some of the investment, it's going to have an impact, isn't it, across local government?
Yes. To give you an idea, like, I think it was Whakatane District Council and their LTPs had something like $180 million of capex for water over the next 10 years. But they said the amount of capex, water capex that they needed to put in to meet the water standards would have been more like 400 million or in excess of 400 million. So there's a lot of councils that have capex that they're just not able to fit into their LTPs because of they don't have the debt headroom to sort of do that. So that's a real challenge. And that will be one of the big hard things, I think, for DIA to look when they're looking at the water service delivery plans, is to really get a true feel for the amount of capex that's necessary to meet the water standards. And I'd probably put forward that the metro councils probably on average have a better understanding of their asset condition than rural councils, so a better place to sort of do that. So just by way of disclosure, LGFA has been invited to be part of the evaluation panel for the water service delivery plans. So we will be involved in that, but more looking at it from a financial sustainability viewpoint.
Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you. And just in terms of, you noticed, and it was, when you said it out loud, I thought, of course, 2020, 21, 22, the impact of one-off government funding, that's that's COVID times, isn't it? Post-COVID support.
Yeah, there's a number of things. There was, initially there was the Provincial Growth Fund, and then there was the Shovel Ready projects, and then there was also the 750 million for water funding. I mean, some of it, it's an accounting issue, because, you know, if you get money for a new playground, you account for it as, it makes you look like you've got an operating surplus. But in reality, you're building a community asset, which is actually not really an asset. It's going to be something that you're going to have ongoing operating costs associated with. But from a pure accounting point of view, it looks like you've generated a surplus. So.
And then, then it swings into OPEX and renewals and maintenance and those kind of things. But in terms of, given the current regime with government, they have got some money to invest in economic development. We're looking at regional deals, but potentially no money in it, but potentially levers or assistance. Have you seen the impact of reduced government funding on the sector? Is that if the one-offs had a really positive impact in terms of capital expenditure, what are you seeing now with the more lean government approach?
Yeah, I mean, councils just have to work with the government that's in place at the time. So there's not a lot of choice in that. And, you know, clearly the current government, there's not a lot of fiscal headroom for anything at the moment. So it is what it is, and you're probably going to feel it, particularly in the area of NZTA funding for sort of roads. And yes, it's certainly some councils, you know, the amount of funding was well below what they expected when they did their LTP. So while the potholes are being fixed, the ability to build new roads, which they would have liked to do in the next sort of 10 years, is now constrained. So, yeah, it creates challenges, because then you have to sort of, councils individually have to make the decision, do we pay for a new road 100% ourselves, or do we not do it?
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. Last question is, in terms of borrowing from LGFA, are you seeing more, there will be the water, but are you seeing more inclination for rounded deals that include multiple aspects of city growth, or is it just fairly project by project? Because we've talked previously, you and I and Blair and others have talked about city deals and regional deals and having kind of one pot to cover a whole range of infrastructure requirements. Are you seeing any more of that thinking? Is that happening? Are those conversations even happening?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what comes out of the city deals, but it doesn't at face value look like there's a lot of government funding going into those things. It's more maybe legislative sort of changes and...
But would that require us to potentially borrow more broadly? That's what I'm asking, I guess.
Sort of potentially, but it would most likely be at the council sort of level. So you'd have to have the headroom within your own financial strategy to be able to do something if it's in addition to what's already in the LTP. I've certainly looked at some of the city deals overseas, and certainly when you look at the likes of Manchester, which is probably the one most talked about, it's quite different than what's being talked about here.
Yeah. So presumably when the headroom is created because water comes off to the side, that's where those conversations about cracking open, doing more things might occur?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges around affordability. When we move to, the development levies and things, you can, or even tolling roads, all those things, it's still the same. And water charges, when you look at the increase in water charges that's going to be required in some areas, it's all the same people having to pay more.
The only difference being the intergenerational ability, presumably, over long horizon, future ratepayers as well. Is that the case?
Yeah, but these are the challenges, so it's not going to be easy, and we'll just have to see where the breaking points sort of are in terms of affordability.
Yeah, thank you. That helps. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. Good questions. And Councillor Casey Cox.
Thank you, Andrew. Just a question on the rates, what's it called, Ratepayers Assistance Scheme. I guess how does that relate to the council's rebate, rates rebate, if at all? And what will it actually mean? Do you have any sense of what it will actually mean for ratepayers?
Okay, yeah, so it's nothing to do with the rebates in terms of that's a government sort of rebate to the sector. So the Ratepayers Assistance Scheme is modelled on a similar scheme in British Columbia. So in the first instance, what it could be used is for ratepayers that are asset rich and cash poor to defer paying their rates. So the likes of Auckland have already been doing a limited amount of that at their own sort of level. But the problem is if the council does it, they don't get the cash in, and therefore they're having to borrow to do that. So what the Ratepayers Assistance Scheme is setting up a special purpose vehicle that if a ratepayer defers their rates, the ratepayer, the special purpose vehicle gives the money to the council up front, and then when the property is eventually sold, they recover the money through the sale of the property. So it's very much like a reverse mortgage, except it would be done at significantly lower financing rates than reverse mortgage. But what is required is government support to remove a lot of the compliance requirements in terms of complying with the Commerce Acts and things like that, because otherwise with small transactions it is hugely administratively burdensome on councils, and you've run into that with insulation schemes and things like that. So, but it could also be used for if there was a small community that needed a seawall, or they could sort of borrow the money and have it as a charge over their property. So again, it's easier than individual ratepayers having to come up with the money up front to build the seawall. So there's a whole lot of things. And Cameron Partners have been working on behalf of the sector to develop the model. So now it's, hopefully it sort of progresses. So it's not compulsory for people to use, but if you want to defer your rates, then you'll be able to do so.
Okay, great. And just, you mentioned a concern around affordability a few times. So I think you're suggesting amalgamation is one way that might be improved. Is there anything else that you see might help to enable better affordability?
Yeah, so LGFA doesn't have a policy on amalgamation. What we do is observe what's happened overseas. So, you know, I look at Tasmania, and I know you've had some work with, done some work with sort of Taswater and things like that, but, you know, amalgamation was a real fear in Tasmania when the water reforms were essentially forced upon the sector. The sector was very much against it. But out of the 29 councils, you've still got 29 councils, so it just didn't eventuate. If you go to France, they've got 38,000 councils. So in my view, it's, you know, one of the challenges for the smaller councils is the sheer compliance, doing things like LTPs, annual plans, you know. It adds a lot of cost, requires a lot of resources, so some of that can be simplified. There's probably no reason why you can't maintain local democracy, but with a lot of shared services. Examples of that are like Kaikoura, which is really its own community, is still a couple of hours away from either Blenheim or Christchurch. And so they now do shared IT services with Huranui, so you can do things like that which enables local democracy to exist. Okay. But that's just a personal
thank you.
comments.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Huata.
Kia ora, Andrew, nau mai hara mai. Can you please help me understand further the credit ratings, and just following on from Mayor Paula's Patai question, how can we as a council maintain our current credit rating and not drop further or even get back to our former one?
Excuse me. So the reason S&P downgraded so many councils were they were comparing the debt levels of New Zealand councils against other sort of jurisdictions. And the big thing that stands out is that the debt levels are high compared to a lot of other jurisdictions, particularly, you know, like Scandinavian countries, Australia, UK, but also the deficits, annual deficits after CapEx are also quite large. So they're the two issues. I don't think the sector can do a lot in the short term because it's going to have to, as a whole, invest more money in water CapEx. So if we want to improve the quality of our water standards, and I think by and large everyone thinks that's a good idea, then it's going to require more debt. So maybe if you look at international comparisons, water reforms tend to take maybe 20 years to get on top of the challenges, especially some areas I can think of councils that are in a relatively good state. But if you look at Wellington, it really is a 20-year challenge to probably address that sort of infrastructure sort of deficit and get back on track. So it's just, I think, lower credit ratings doesn't mean that what councils are doing is not sustainable. It's just saying that debt levels are going to be more elevated for a period of time. And then one day we'll come down the other side of the CapEx thing and...
one day.
Yeah, in a long time. And then maybe there'll be upgrades and things at that point in time. But as S&P noted, you know, no council's ever defaulted in New Zealand, and but downgrading the sector, they're not suggesting that any council's in danger of defaulting. But also LGFA, while you don't see it, does an awful lot of monitoring of councils. We just don't submit formally on annual plans or long-term plans, so you don't see us out on public criticising councils. But we certainly go, the board's asked us to go and meet with a couple of councils where we do have concerns and speak directly with them. So we are doing, as OAG are doing and DIA doing, having that oversight of the sector. So I think it's pretty well, you know, there's a lot of oversight that does go on, which is positive.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Huata. That's the end of your questions, is it? Thank you. Excellent. I don't see any further questions on the board. Andrew, thank you for your presentation and for answering all of our questions. Really appreciate that. I'm happy to move the item. We can ask you to take a seat behind the presentation desk, and we'll move into debate. Thank you. Do I have a seconder, colleagues? Councillor Wilson, thank you for that. Thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate your comprehensive report and the update that you've provided us on your half-year performance, and for highlighting the issues that you see coming forward, and certainly around that Waters CCO. It's a space that we are keenly interested in and are also watching. I think we also do predict further amalgamations into the future, but as a first step, you know, we're pretty comfortable with the trajectory that we're taking. It's really encouraging, though, to see LGFA's continued financial strength and adaptability, especially amid some of the recent global economic uncertainties that we've witnessed and seen. And as I say, with our future water CCO right on our horizon. So the efforts in diversifying your funding sources and maintaining your credit ratings are critically important to councils like Hamilton, and that's what's ensuring that we can continue to invest in our communities with confidence. Thank you for that. We value our partnership with LGFA, and we see it as an absolute partnership. And we value also Gary's participation in the running of the business in that as well. And we see that that really does support our local government's resilience. So, so thank you, everyone. Kia ora. And I see Mayor Paula for debate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. It's always good to talk to you and confirm some of what we believe we know about what's going on in the sector from your perspective is also very helpful. I think I'm glad that Hamilton Council, long before my time, agreed to be part of LGFA as a shareholder, and I think it has delivered us great benefits in the time that we have been both a shareholder, and I believe it will also offer great benefits in terms of what's coming at us through Local Waters Done Well. Taking up upon the point that we have no choice but to deliver some kind of CCO for water services, and that will be costs, and some of the costs will be huge in the short term in terms of delivering the standards and requirements, the economic regulations of government around water services. And we do need to partner with others to keep that cost effective, and I believe LGFA is part of that ability to broker deals with other councils, with Tauranga and others, to create, you know, shared services, shared platforms, shared borrowing across some of those kind of things to make it even more affordable for Hamiltonians. In fact, I don't think we can operate in a silo. We've got to look more broadly at this. I do think we are noticing, we've been through some interesting times in the last 6 years. We've got a burgeoning capital deficit as a country, we've talked about in the previous item. We've got government with fiscal constraints. We are fiscally constrained. There is affordability issues in the community. People are straining under the increased costs all around, energy and food included. And we've got to be mindful of that. So we've got to look at borrowing differently, and we've got to be looking at borrowing intergenerationally, because today's ratepayers cannot afford it all. So thank you for the work that you're doing. We look forward to having further negotiations, conversations with you as we step forward into this new unknown. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further debate on the board. So let's put the recommendation, and that's to receive the report and approve the LGFA draft statement of intentions for 25 to 28. All those in favour, if you would raise your hand. Those against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Perfect. And now we will move to public excluded. So I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Oh, I beg your pardon. No, we have one more item. And that is item number 10, page 124. Let me just get to that. 139, I beg your pardon, colleagues. I'm having trouble with my technology, goodness sake. Here we are. And so this is an item, is anybody going to introduce this one, or is this simply...
I'll move it, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and seconded by Councillor Sarah. It is really just a matter for approval through this committee. The decisions have already been made. I won't really allow any questions or debate on this one, so let's put that to the committee, and all those in favour, if you would raise your hand, and those against.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you. And now we can move to public excluded, and seconded by Councillor Louise. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you, colleagues.